Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things Cube, but with refreshments. I am your host, Stu, at StuMTG. And as always, I'm joined by my other host,
Anthony,
a.k.a.
Uberbear.
We got a fun one today.
Yeah.
This is a Cube highlight, Cube extravaganza, Cube changing, Cube evolving episode that we're going to talk about today. Specifically, one of Anthony's cubes. That Anthony, let's start out with something. You were hesitant with this one for a little while. I feel that there was a little bit of apprehension about building a cube like this, the type of cube that we're going to talk about today. Is that accurate?
Yeah, he's referring to the Monopoly, which we've talked about in a previous episode at its 2.16 version. What we're going to be talking about today is how did I re-equip, retool, and prep this cube for a 4.32 version that's featured by community vote at CubeCon. So we'll see you there in October. We'll throw up the dates and the information. CubeCon tickets are on sale right now. And we will have all that included in the show notes in addition to on our UberCube Discord, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, if you're not going to CubeCon, you should be going to CubeCon because that's where I'm going to be.
All right, let's start out with a couple of shout outs. First of all, want to give a huge thanks to a brand new Patreon, Brian Christensen. Thank you very much for your support. And we hope you enjoy this show as much as you've obviously enjoyed the rest of the episodes. Thank you very much. So, want to give a huge shout out, first of all, to the Capital Cube Championship. This is happening on August 17th, 2024. Would encourage anybody that is local to the DC area to check out the UberCube podcast show notes for this episode that we post in our Discord. We have a link there to go and check out the details of as well as get tickets. All proceeds of this event will be donated to So Others Might Eat to help those in need of the community up there. It's a 64-player event, and it's going to be awesome.
Our good friend Lincoln that showed up at UberCubeathon, he and I were just talking recently. He's squaring it off. It's ready to go. He's got a beautiful Discord set up. It is locked and loaded. Already got 2 pods actually filled out last time we communicated. It's really cool. Looking forward to actually trying to attend this one as well, too. About a 3-hour drive.
Yeah, not far at all. And Lincoln, huge shout out. He was a lovely, lovely individual to spend time with. I got to spend a bunch of time just hanging out and chatting with him at our UberCube event here in North Carolina. So again, would really encourage anybody, if you're close to the area, go hang out. Absolutely fantastic cause. Looks like that's going to be a lot of fun. Also, we want to talk about Cube for a Cause.
From Scott Mertz that mentioned this to us on this previous episode.
Friend of the show, yeah. Scott Mertz. Big shout out to Scott, who came on recently to discuss his Curio Cube, which is an absolute delight. So this is a twice a year 64-player for charity event hosted in Brooklyn. All profits from SS24 will be donated to UNRWA. This is an aid organization supporting Palestinian refugees, and you can find all details at www.upkeepnewyork.com. Tickets are $65, and again, we got a link to that event in our show notes. Again, if you're local to the area, go check it out. We got these Cube events just popping up everywhere, and they're going to be a blast.
Yeah, we told you. That
the year of Cube.
It's the year of Cube. All right, before we go any further, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to enjoy our libations of the show. And let's start out with our number one host this evening.
Yeah, so I have myself a Lil Slurp. This is a juicy India Pale Ale from the Noda Brewing Company. This has kind of become my jam recently because it's got this beautiful pink can. It's 6%, and it's delicious.
The only reason why you're number one this evening is because May couldn't make it.
That is true.
I just want to be straight on that.
I'll be number 2 for the rest of the show. That's fine with me.
And I am having a Sweetwater Brewing Company G13 Hazy IPA. It's a hemp-based beer, so it's got that nice little dankness.
It's a good one.
Yeah, you probably don't want to crack this open in your bedroom. It'll dank it up pretty good. All right, let's go. All right, so let's start out conceptually. This cube started out as a 216. Now, obviously, that's sort of around the... It's not a conventional number, if you will, right? 216, right. Not a 180 or a 360. Tell us why. And obviously, my assumption from, I'm going to play the idiot here, which is very easy for me. I'm assuming that those odd numbers are coming in because, again, this is a Monopoly, this is a desert cube, all the lands are in the cube, so now you've got to accommodate for the fact that you don't have that basic land station to choose from when you finished up the draft. Yeah, so you actually got that right. So we talked about this 216 episode, which we do have another iteration of this. And the way I did it is I kind of pseudo reverse engineered Chill MTGs, and as well as Bones's Amakar Desert Cube, so Dragon's Winter Night and the Amakar Desert Cube, to figure out what their land counts were, and then did multipliers, or rather divided it backwards to figure out what the differentials were, to see how I can actually make that into like a Desert Cube that could work in a bar with 4 players, which kind of tethers into the idea. I got in my notes, I'm going to compare it to my 2-headed giant cube. And the reason why I'm going to make that direct comparison is because of a Desert Cube environment. As you have stated, it does have all the basic lands and non-basic lands in the draft. So typically per pack, for those that aren't familiar, you will be taking 5 to 6 of your land pairings in addition to your payoff cards while you're drafting your 3 packs of 18 in this case.
Right.
That's how it's designed.
Yeah. So now
the complexity comes with filling out a pod. And that's why I wanted to do a direct correlation to my 2-headed giant cube. Because we get together and go, hey, guys, you want to play 2-headed giant cube? And there's always a 5th player that randomly shows up. And now the 2-headed cube is now off. Well, the same thing to truly test the viability of a desert cube where you have no resources. You're struggling for that, right? You're going through that, the horse with no name. You're dragging, the sun is beating down on you, right? I'm doing a little Beastie Boys, a little America. But you get where I'm going with this. As you move through this, it really kind of takes away from the motivation to play the cube. We can kind of test it in 4s, we can test it in 6s, but it's not really capturing the environment because now the lands are more readily available.
Well, it's such a huge consideration as well, right? When you've got 216 and you've got 4 players, like, right, now you've got the whole cube. You're not going to draft with less than 4 players on a 216,
Correct.
right? You're unlikely to say, hey, there's 3 of us.
Yes.
But when you've even got a 432 number that you're building with that number specifically because you want to get that 8-player experience, you're not just doing that because it's a great number and having 8 players to draft a cube is weird and wonderful. You're also doing that because you know that you need those cards. You need that 432. You need that full number because heaven forbid the worst thing could happen. And let's say you've got a 6-player draft and now you're how many cards down, right? So you're playing how many packets? You're playing 4 packs of 12 as an example?
3 packs of 18.
3 packs of 18.
What the goal
okay.
is here, right? For a normal 8-player draft, and it was even 3 packs of 18 at a 216 draft.
Right.
That's how this was designed to make sure that everybody had their lands. One little parachute that I do have this cube that makes it very different than from the Dragons of Winter's Night or the Amakar Desert Cube is I leaned into treasures are a resource for both killing and for marching forward.
Well, this goes back to that statement, right? What happens if you've got only 6 instead of 8 players? You shuffle up that cube, you're not selectively shuffling, and you've got potentially 80 lands that you could really need, right? It could be, it's not even necessarily that you're also down a bunch of lands. You could be down specifically fixing, and as we're going to talk about, there's been a color expansion as well, or a color support expansion, I would say. So it really does provide a level of criticality for the experience that you need to get those 8 players in a draft.
Going back to the direct comparison to the 2-headed giant cube, I have, as of today's date, not been able to get 8 people in a room to validate and test this cube. That's an equal frustration because I come in and go, hey guys, you want to play the Desert Cube? And 7 shows up. And yes, we have tested at 6, but going back to my point, we're not doing a real validation of the cube's capability of actually managing that, right?
Right.
I'm going off of this so a lot of theory crafting had to go into this idea. A lot of the math working it backwards from the Dragons of Winter Night and the Amakar Desert Cube. So I know the 216 worked. That was the proof of concept. We did get to play that.
We did.
There was some imbalances and things that we did work out, but it was able to sit on the back porch, get 4 of us, not too hard. Feels like a commander pod. That's actually a pretty easy thing to do. Doubling that commander pod has been challenging, for lack of better terms.
Of course. So let's talk about that point specifically when it comes to the math, right? So you've mentioned that you mathed it out, kind of reverse engineered a little bit from a couple of cubes. Again, this is Chill MTG's Dragons of Winter's Night Cube and Bones's Amakar Desert Cube. How much of the math was just related to the lands? Let's start out with how much of it was, I want to get X percentage or X number of lands in based on the entire cube list.
The lands were the most critical component. That was
I would imagine so.
That was where I started from. Because there's a tendency when you start putting playables into a cube is to oversaturate playables. And that's easy. That's okay to do when you have a land box outside of that. But when my direct infrastructure is built around the baseline of making sure that players receive adequate amounts of basic lands and or the different tap lands they'll receive to do their color fixing,
right,
it can become problematic. We know this for a fact. So whenever this was tested at a 416 notion, our good friend Bill did the first thing that I kind of already planned for. It was funny. We got a snicker at the table because Bill said secretly is drafting every single land that comes past him.
And he specifically said, I'm going to break this cube by drafting every single land that comes my way.
And he was unsuccessful in the breakage. And the reason why, the thing that he didn't account for, traditionally, that probably would work, and I wasn't hoping for that.
I'm going to say I'm skeptical a little bit on whether or not that realistically would work. If you're just going to hard draft every single land and not worry about a single playable until
pack 3.
Right at the end, or pack 3. I don't know if that's a smart way to draft a desert.
It is, if your intention was to dry up the mana base and then to starve the other players playing into the idea. But what he didn't know is I had that parachute of treasures are a significant, if not binding theme. Because going back to what I wanted to do here is make treasures. Treasures have been a conversation that we've had a lot, right? And there's pros and cons to treasures. People have mixed feelings about treasures and what they've done to Magic. But they are here to stay at this point. We thought it was a one-time thing, and it just continues treasures. Everything makes treasures. Good, bad, indifferent, doesn't matter. We have them, right? Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, how could I make a cube, this was my top-down design, that took treasures and either use them as resource management and or kind of turn them into a weaponization system, much like we've kind of seen with the recent sets where food has become weaponized, right? Mm-hmm. Opposed to just gain 3 life. Now you can get things that actually says, like, if you get rid of a food token, XYZ damage, right? And I kind of was thinking I could do that with treasures too, and I feel like I've successfully pulled that off.
Well, this is where I was asking the question about the numbers and about the percentages and where that reverse engineering started and how it was processed, right? So I'm not as familiar with the other 2 cubes. I'll admit that first of all. So you've got 432 cards in this cube. Of that, 154 are lands. That's a lot of lands. Now, obviously, I say obviously, maybe it's not quite so obvious, but this is not a singleton cube. And in fact, for each of the color pairs, so for example, Azorius has 5 copies of Skybridge Towers. Dimir has 5 copies of Waterfront District. Rakdos has Tramway Station, and then Racers Ring and Botanical Plaza and so on and so forth. So you've got literally 5 identical lands per color pair.
Correct.
That's a lot of lands just to start with. But then you've also got all of your, utility lands as well as all the basics. So that represents
35%.
35%
of the cube's composition. Because there is no basic land station to go to afterwards, which creates that resource management during the draft.
So now I want to ask this. If you're looking at these reverse engineering processes as far as the Dragons of Winter's Night and the Amankar cube, the Amankar Desert cube, was you also taking into consideration any other resource generation cards and synergies within those cubes that we're going to be able to generate mana? Obviously, treasures is the big one, but if there's other ways to be able to generate mana, were those numbers all kind of tied together when it comes to the overall design of the cube and the number in the cube?
No, because I wanted to have a unique identity. I wanted the treasures, again, they're one and done for the majority of them, right? So you crack them and you could advance your board state, and or you save them like a piggy bank for a win. That's the design aspects here. Either you use them like a savings account, or you use them like a big spender where you're just burning them nonstop to get what you want when you want it, right?
Okay.
So there's an economic twist to that, which is kind of the overarching theme of this entire cube, is every card that I have chosen or curated to put in here is intended to have an economic theme. Every single card down to, with a few exceptions where I'm kind of taking some, let's just say I'm taking some artistic liberties and or the card was needed to create like a functional purpose, like Dragon Spark Reactor doesn't really read into the word economics, but it is in there in my own little twisted brain of it's a reactor, it's nuclear power generation, it's a monopoly.
We need
board.
That for Bitcoin.
It's the electric company is what I'm doing.
Yeah,
but I don't really
Perfect.
explain that to anybody. These are like Easter eggs that maybe no one will ever get, but the chuckle is there. But then stuff is more on the nose, like one of the key cards that does drive this, and there's only one of them in there, is Revel in Riches. And for those that aren't familiar with Revel in Riches, it is for 4 colorless and 1 black, you get an enchantment. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, create a colorless treasure token with tap, sacrifice its artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. That's the gist of the whole treasure function that we're doing. And at the beginning of your upkeep, so you have to go around full circle, which isn't hard here. If you have 10 or more treasures, you win the game. That's the savings account. You're playing an aggro type player that's burning the treasures to create board state, and or you're sitting back using this as the pinnacle, the apex, and you just want to get to that 10, and or you board wipe to get the thing. You see where I'm going with this? These were my leading edges.
I've played with and against this card.
Right.
And this, to me, is one of those wonderful tension pieces. When it's on the battlefield, and I'm not going to go through the cube right now and start looking at how many cards you have that remove enchantments or permanents or whatever, but this is definitely a card that once it's down, you've got to keep an eye on it. And especially in a cube like this, again, where you've got those synergies and you've got so many cards that are able to generate treasures, and that might just well be at sorcery speed, right? It might be just creatures that are coming down or other abilities. So there might not be a way to sort of catch someone on the end step like, haha, I have my 10th treasure. But it's still that tension piece that you have to...
The philosophy of this cube is based off of the dichotomy of live for now or save for later. And that's what a lot of people in our economic system deal with,
That's right. That's
You're
right.
either putting money in an IRA because you want to be rich later, theoretically, and or you buy that big screen TV right now because it'll give you joy and pleasure today.
I just bought the big screen TV.
You do. See what I'm talking about? It's a saving versus spending. It's all in here.
I try and do a bit of both, though, you know.
I'm doing these little nuggets in here. It's all a little bit, there's a little bit of a gag reel going on in this cube, and there's a whole bunch of, going back to Dragon Spark Reactor. If you saw the electric company in that, good for you. I'm telling you now, that's when I was putting in there, I'm giggling because that's what I'm representing on a Monopoly board.
That's right.
But some of them are a lot more clear cut. But as we go through this, the ideal situation, I want this cube, as now that I've migrated up to 432 cards, I'm going to be featured at CubeCon. I have to be able to meet the requirement of 50-minute rounds and then go into turns and then sudden death or whatever they're doing, right? And so one of the things that I did was increase the basics. I did that recently because a lot of my original concept was I wanted the treasures to be so invaluable that you would hold them, use them, burn them in order to replace. And then that way you could do the tap lands and afford to have tap lands. And then you could have treasures to motivate you to move forward.
Yeah.
And it created like this other juxtaposition, this dichotomy too. I wanted all this to kind of be unpacked. But I've been doing a lot of pack one, pick ones lately. And I throw them up. And I got this little interesting revelation that's been spoken to me. And our good friend Christian kind of had said this too. People are saying that basic lands in a desert cube environment they equate to a Moxen and a Pirate Vintage cube. How do you feel about that statement?
I don't know about that.
I don't know either. Like I believe them. They're telling me when they draft a desert cube, which I'm not a desert cube expert. I wanted to have Bones on here. I wanted to have Chill on here. We'll have them on again later.
Yes.
But I want them to actually cross-evaluate and look at this cube and see what they think about what I'm trying to do. But to see people going, I'm going to pack one, pick one, a Moxen, and while I'm looking at, say, a Revel and Riches in the same pack, my brain goes, I'm taking that Revel and Riches. And they're like, no, I'm going to take that Basic Plains. And then they'll say, that's like a Moxen in a desert cube.
I'm going to disagree with that, and the reason is very simple. If a basic land could be considered a Moxen, then are you also saying that a fetch land or any land that can enter the battlefield untapped and just tap for a single color would be considered a Moxen? You're not able to ramp yourself with it. The reason why the Moxen are so absurdly powerful is because you can play them for 0. You can accelerate yourself away from that 1 mana turn 1, 2 mana turn 2 kind of trajectory and accelerate you to the point where you're going to be able to cast higher cost spells on turns earlier, which a basic land isn't necessarily going to be able to
I'm going to go with
there.
yes. I'm going to go with yes and no, and removing treasures from the calculus here, right? Because they may not have evaluated the treasures in that. But if it was just I have a plethora of tapped lands and then a bunch of them that come and play tapped, that is kind of time walking, advancing one step ahead. At the cost of not having that color diversity, I can see the logic of a basic plains over any old, let's just say a Azorius Guildgate, which is not in here, where I can actually now get blue and white, but now I've lost a turn to get that versus basic plains gives me what I need now. So it quickens the pace. Does that make sense? So I can see the logic path.
It does. I'll just say I think that's a bit of a stretch. I don't really want to. We'd be getting a little bit too far ahead of ourselves.
We don't know
this
enough
point.
about this cube to actually understand that. That's what I'm going to say. This is an unsolved mystery.
And this is why I'm going to disagree. If we're going to sort of stick on this point for now. We've drafted this cube on more than one occasion. We drafted it at 216.
At 216,
right?
Correct.
I never, even with Bill and his ridiculous shenanigans of trying to take every single land in the cube, right? I've never got to a point where I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough lands to play this deck. I've never even got to the point where I thought I don't have enough basic lands to be able to guarantee that I can play somewhat on curve. And even the dual lands, if you want to call them that, they enter tapped. So if you're going to play that on turn 1, and even you're going to play another one of those on turn 2, yes, you're going to find yourself behind. So if that's where sort of this is a mux, if you've got a basic land, because it just gives you the ability to cast those spells on curve, then I can understand it. However, the fact that you're starved a little bit, if you will, for fixing, because you don't have access to fetch lands and triomes and shocks and duels and all that kind of stuff, there's always going to be that payoff. There's always going to be that, what am I willing to sacrifice in order for me to be able to play my spells? And I am very, very willing, especially in a cube like this where I'm not trying to win in the first 2 or 3 turns, to sacrifice a little bit of speed to guarantee that I can cast my spells. And I think that going from that to a basic land is a mux is just, there's a little bit too much of a bridge there that I'm not willing to gap with just that.
I just thought it was such an interesting idea.
It is interesting.
It's a timing thing, right?
And
Christian has pushed this timing thing over and over again. He will actually deliberately not take tap non-basics in this cube. He has pushed the threshold of I'm only going to take them. And it creates like this aggro synergy. But there is a cost associated with him doing that because now he doesn't have access to the big splashy spells. That's another dynamic in this cube that I wanted. If you're willing to take the time off to save, this is going to be like Life the board game, when you choose the path and you've got they have the teacher and they have the doctor and they have the lawyer, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you choose a different path.
Choose a profession.
But you get the different paychecks.
Get your paycheck at the end.
But one takes you a little bit more time to go around that route because you chose to go to Harvard or whatever it is on the game versus you wanted a shortcut and go to the tech school in the game. You could take like 3 steps faster to try to get to retirement. It's an interesting dynamic. Life kind of... It's
an economic decision. That's what it comes down to, right?
Yeah. Do you want to get the money now or do you want to get it later? That's ultimately what it comes down to.
I want the money now. I want the big screen TV.
And to put it in perspective for the type of tap lands, this is just naming one. This is a design aspect of this cube, too. It's going to be stuff like Waterfront District, which is from New Capenna, and that's where most of this cube is actually derived from, is New Capenna, because I wanted this seedy, kind of dirty, back streets, 1920s America, economic,
the
Wall Street
crash, Depression.
The Great Depression.
Yeah,
that's what I'm doing here. And in the world, there's laborers, and there's the stinking rich, the 1%ers versus the 99%ers. It's all in here, right? I front-loaded all that. But like Waterfront District is going to be a land and it enters the battlefield tapped. That's a detriment. But it also taps for basically Dimir. You can either choose to do blue or you can do black, right? You got that option. But the cards that I chose to do is you can also now pay 2 colorless and Dimir, tap it, sacrifice Waterfront District, draw a card.
Yep.
So once you no longer need this card, and plus this fits the Monopoly thing I'm doing. I wanted these, in Monopoly, you complete sets. And you wanted to get all these sets out, and you want to get all the New York Strip, or you want to get all of the Park Place Boardwalk.
All the train stations, baby.
Which the trains are in here too. I wanted all these little sub-themes embedded in this while having kind of this interesting economic twist. I think it's a really cool concept. I hope the people at CubeCon like it. I'm just working on the speed. So one of the actions I took recently based on the Moxon conversation is I decided that maybe... We know from playtesting that we've seen games where some of the games went a little longer than desired. So I actually cut down the tap lands and I increased the basics by like 2-fold on each grouping, which ultimately doesn't really hurt the cube. It's just by my design kind of hurt the idea of the treasures.
I don't think, I would complain, this is just me speaking, I wouldn't complain if you just literally slammed all of the scry lands and all of the sack and draw card lands, right? Because that's basically what all these things do. You're either scrying or drawing cards or whatever. That to me is such a genius decision to make, to put those cards in here rather than just a generic ETB tapped, or even the shock lands, right? The shock lands, great. You get to pay 2 life, they enter the battlefield untapped. That's a nice thing. But the fact that you've now got this extra bit of risk versus reward, like, oh, do I want to sack this? Well, maybe I've generated enough equity in my treasures that I don't even need this land anymore. And I'm very happy to just dump off my property for money because I've already got a stack of gold over there just waiting for me to go off and win the game. So So I love the fact that you've got lands like that in
I'm
there.
thinking
It's
CDs and bonds.
excellent.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm making them as long-term investments or short-term investments.
Yep.
That's what I want to happen here. One of the things that I had that's curious about this type of design aspect is I want treasures to be the focal point. They're the thing that you're pursuing, right? That's you're going after the treasure. That's either you're using that to press your wealth forward and or you're burning it to get that fast reward, right? Well, one of the things that I was concerned about is the basics detract from the treasures, and I didn't want to super saturate that idea because I don't want people to ignore the treasure tasking and use those when I can just get a basic plains and do the same thing. So having the tap lands created validation for the treasures opposed to having untapped lands, which would invalidate the treasure.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I absolutely. And again, I think that's all part of why cards are like that, where you get to sacrifice them. You're only drawing one card, but that one card could be the difference maker when you've got 15 treasures or something sitting there, and you can just, again, use all of that accumulated wealth to do your thing.
So there's an insane amount of thought that went in this. So back to your original core question about the math and the calculus that I went into this. Yes, I used some basic branch off of other people's cubes that are definitely successful. Dragons of Winter's Night from Chill MTG was my hands down favorite cube that I played last year at CubeCon 2023. And I loved it so much. I'm like, I want to do something but I want to do a spin off of this idea, right? And then it's also that little bit of uncertainty that the treasures were a second thought. Like, I kind of knew I wanted a desert cube, but I also was uncertain about whether or not the math would always work. And we did actually experience that during playtesting at 216. Again, not at 432. But I remember Nathan was talking about during one of our drafts, during the starvation that Bill was doing, he was the person that got starved out. Where the rest of us were getting pretty close to we were eating our vegetables, right?
That's right.
So Bill's starving the table. He's sucking up every land for 3 packs. And this was something that I had actually thought about. And again, I want to tell you that Sneaky Snake Bill was all about doing this, right? He's going to just starve the table. But I already put enough in there to handle this. So he absorbed all of it, but I already got my 15 to 16 to 17 lands. I can play my deck. I believe Chris had 2. Christian had 2. Whoever, we're all here. But Nathan was one of the people that was kind of the outlier that was a little short. He was taking the playables because desert cubes are not overly familiar to our group. Not even necessarily loved, if I'm being honest with you. It's not the favorite of our group. It's different. It's foreign to us. It's unique.
I would agree. It's not a because
it's weird.
There's a sort of comfort, right? In you know what, even if it's maybe going to be impactful, maybe it's going to slow me down a little bit. But I've always got that comfort knowing that even if I don't pick up any fixing, I can always just go with 17 basic lands if I'm drafting 2 colors and just kind of hope that I get the one. And I've drafted like that sometimes where I've just got a little carried away with the playables and I thought, screw it, I'm just going to play 17 basics and just pray that I get both colors when I need them. And typically that does work out. I don't think the math supports relying on that as a strategy to be able to cast all of your spells. But in something like this, it's, you know, you're not trying to win in the first few turns. It's a little bit slower.
Yeah.
You can get away with it.
So Bill shorted the market.
He did short the market.
That's what he did. He shorted the market. And Nathan came out with a little less lands than he originally intended. And he definitely had his bottom lip had poked out, right? Like, I don't think I can play my deck. But then you see him kind of light up, realizing he has so many things that produce treasures that now get him out of this bind that he's in, where maybe he's got 13 lands, but he's kind of he's got his curve going pretty top heavy. And then he comes out ahead, right? Because now the treasures actually are the bailout. And literally the bailout. I'm doing like economic bailouts. Like, that's what I'm thinking about. Like, people don't get inside of my head too much. But when I'm building this cube, that's kind of what I'm doing is, yes, you got starved. Bill shorted the market. The other person, because people are going to try to do that CubeCon. I imagine that happens to a degree. We get a certain player where it is a spike strategy. It could be, right?
Well, I think the hope is that someone who's drafting it would have listened to this episode and found out that we've experienced that firsthand with someone trying to short the market with the lands, and they were not successful. And I think one of the reasons for that is there's just too many lands. There's 150 plus lands in this cube. You can't take them all, right? You can't catch them all. This ain't Pokemon.
It's not Pokemon.
You can't catch all the lands. There's going to be ones floating around. And eventually, if you're going to have any desire to be successful, certainly at CubeCon, where you want to try and play competitively to an extent, you've got to build a deck, and you can't but this isn't Lands Matters, or this isn't Vintage Lands or Legacy Lands where you can just, go off with those. So you're going to have to build a deck.
Yeah,
Sorry, Bill.
And you got that interesting duality that I had to put in here. We're beating this lands to death, but the basic lands again were kind of taken away from my treasures. But at the same time, I got to make that 50-minute mark because I don't want these games to be all slow. I don't want too many people to lean in too much to the tapped lands, even though they have long-term payoffs. You can't have everybody going to retirement in the game,
and that is
the problem.
Well, not only is it's experienced as well, and I will say again. Going back, the very first time, maybe the first or second time that I played this cube, we was playing with our good friend Sam, and I remember there was the first time we played this cube, I believe, first or second time, and I was playing with our good friend Sam, and guess what happened? Sam and I played, and played, and played, and I want to say that our game went on for probably a good hour and a half, and it was just so much back and forth, and using resources, and applying, pressure and developing the board and that kind of stuff. I never felt constrained. And that's something that I think is always an important consideration when you're building a cube, right? And we've talked about this with other cubes as well. You don't want to get to the point where it's just battle cruisers looking at each other or army of Zerg or whatever, staring at each other. There's got to be ways to win. There's got to be ways to break parity. There's got to be ways to go off. And I felt with that iteration of the cube, it felt a little bit more like that, like it was difficult for us to break parity. It could have been that we just built decks that just went up against and butted heads with each other. So this is one of the reasons why I'm so excited now to draft this one, because that was one of the longest games I've ever played in a cube and one of the most enjoyable games I've ever played. And not because it wasn't that it even felt like it was a super long game. It just was a long game with two players going at it.
Yeah, so one of the things that I have to problem solve is how to quicken the pace, right? So ultimately that came down to the lands. Another thing too that I've kind of pressed, and it's outside of my comfort zone with designing this cube, it's my first time going into a foray of not singleton. So I'm actually running multiples of, and then I actually made the 216 to 432 not as deplorable as it could have been for me. That could have been hard if I stuck to singleton, because I knew I wanted to double this cube down. I feel like it has a voice, and I wanted to add some more cards. So doubling it down, adding a few more cards that do kind of replicated things, it's okay. But I was very choice in the things that replicate. So I didn't want stuff that was impactful. Like there's not multiple Revel of Riches. There's not multiple Killer Services. There's not multiple Dragonspark Reactors. What there are is cards that are kind of like trivial. And I'll use some examples here of stuff like Prize Fight. I have 3 copies of Prize Fight, whereas before maybe I had 2. And Prize Fight is for 1 colorless and 1 green. You get an instant. Target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. Create a treasure token. And the design intent was that green needed some removal mechanisms. And that's okay. But there's no reason for me to try to stress out about, like, I need to find another, like, functional reprint. I'm just going to be okay with having 3 prize fights. Because prize fights, to me, represents... And I love boxing. I think it's a fantastic sport. But if I'm doing it in the hierarchy that I have within this cube's design of this plane that I've made of the Monopoly, this is kind of your economically poor individuals trying to win that final prize, right? So having 3 prize fights isn't really taken away from the game. It's actually adding more to it. I want there to be a little bit more, air quotes, the economically suppressed individuals opposed to the super rich, revel in riches people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
From a philosophical standpoint, which is weird. I'm thinking about this way too much, but...
I don't think it's a stretch, but I also do think cards like this are wonderful examples of where cards that can be overlooked elsewhere are going to find such a wonderful home in cubes like this, right? Because it's 1 and a green, which is pretty cheap. Should be fairly straightforward for you to do that with your mana. You do get a treasure token, right? Mm-hmm. So you can cast it with your lands. Now you've got a treasure, a little bit of ramp, and like you say, you've got that removal ability. So I think it's a fantastic card. You've got a few examples of that. Another one that I actually wanted to bring up as a card that you have multiple of is Hornswoggle.
Yeah, people get hornswoggled all the time.
This is what
this is like Amway. I was thinking Amway. My mom and dad got hornswoggled by Amway.
So this is a 2 colorless and 1 blue mana instant, and it's very simple.
You're going to get a cruise after this conversation.
I am.
You got to tell 14 of your friends.
This is counter target creature spell. You create a colorless treasure artifact token. Very, very simple, very elegant. fits the theme of the cube. It's a counterspell. It's not even a conditional counterspell other than the fact that it has to be a creature, right? But I think it's a wonderful card. And again, it's adding to that treasure generating mechanism. And one of the things that I love about it is not just this, but it's not just one color. It's not just red that creates treasures. It's not just blue, or it's all of these colors that you're now being able to get this ramping kind of effect from the treasures as well.
So, if like Mary Kay or Tupperware or Amway.
I do. I know all of the above.
Bitcoin.
All of the above, yes.
Hornswoggle.
Hornswoggle. All right.
So in the CD game of the Monopoly, there's a couple of like key cards that we kind of want to point out. We're going to tell you to check out the cube. We want your feedback and want your criticisms because I want this to be finely tuned. It is hard to get a play group of 8 people to sit down and play the Monopoly. So feel free to pick this apart. Listeners, come at me. It's okay. I need it. But I got this one card that I really want Stu to talk about that kind of epitomizes what I'm trying to do here. And for me, I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory here. I lived in Florida for a long time. I wasn't making much money. Life was hard. And one of the things that Florida would allow was these things like Amscot, where you could go borrow some money to pay your electric bill, but they would charge you, they wanted it back within a week, and they would charge you a minimum of 10% of what you borrowed. You borrow $100, you're paying back $110. That's very much like some weird Florida, and I love me some Florida. We lived there forever. This little guy here reminded me of the Amscot guy.
I am aware. We get these places. They're all over the place where I grew up in the UK, like payday loans, basically.
That's
so
what
you
it
get
was.
you get a loan the day before. Like, hey, you want £400? All right, perfect. There's your 400, and then a week later you owe them £550, and you're incredibly broke.
Or a pawn shop. He's running
like a pawn shop. Yeah, you're probably better off. All right, so this is Feign the Broker. For 2 colorless and 1 black, you get a legendary creature, Human Warlock. It's a 3/3, and it has 4 abilities. The first one is tap, sacrifice a creature, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. You can also tap, remove a counter from a creature you can control to create a treasure token. You can also tap, sacrifice an artifact, and create a 2/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying. And you can also pay 3 and a black and untap Feign the Broker.
You'll definitely see him on Pawn Stars. That's what I was kind of going for. Just to get in that inner chuckle that while I'm building these, like, yeah, that's what I'm doing. That's like how weird this is.
One of the things that I love about cards like this, in cubes like this, I don't want to call this like a sort of a newer player's trap necessarily of falling into, but you've always got to look at this card in the context of everything else that can happen within a cube or a deck or whatever. So tap and sacrifice a creature, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. So now you're thinking of any other cards that I've got where sacrificing a creature and or even putting +1/+1 counters on creatures is going to generate benefits. Tap to remove a counter from a creature you control, create a treasure token. Now you're getting the treasures. Sacrifice an artifact. Now you've got any kind of effect that allows you to gain benefit from either sacrificing an artifact, or if it's a creature artifact, sacrificing a creature, and you're also getting, not an artifact creature, which is unfortunate, but you're now getting a creature, and it's a 2/1 flyer, which is no small thing, and you get to pay 3 and a black to untap and just do it again. Cards like this they are payoffs. They are glue, in my opinion, for cubes like this, where I see this is a pick one, pack one card for me.
It's fun. It's a build around.
It's an amazing card.
So you had actually walked into the pawn shop or the Amscot and you need to borrow something. And we're going to actually go to the pawn shop right now. Listeners, follow me.
I want to borrow that jacket.
We're going to borrow a Terrarian's Soul Cleaver.
Ooh.
This is what you're going to borrow. You're going to borrow from Feign the Broker here, but you get a Terrarian's Soul Cleaver. For 1 color, you get a legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature has vigilance. Whenever another artifact or creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on equipped creature, equipped 2. So all those treasures are striking the graveyard as they kind of go out of the system, right?
Yeah.
You're burning them. So that's kind of where my brain space was.
Artifact or creature. So now you tap and sacrifice a creature. You've met that condition. You tap and sacrifice an artifact. Again, these are the 2 abilities from Feign. Now you've got another trigger on that as well. So you can see how a card like that, which might look a little bit innocuous at first because it's only 1 mana to cast and it's only 2 mana to equip. But suddenly you've got this outrageously strong engine that really a card like that can win the game very, very quickly.
And that's my intent. Like you invested, you saved your treasures, moved to combat, sacked your treasures. They think you're going to buy something bigger. No, you're not. I'm burning my entire IRA down.
I don't even have to cast a spell, baby.
Bye-bye, Roth.
I've got 8 black mana floating, and I'm swinging for the win.
Which leads me to this next card. You want to skip all this investment. You don't want to do all of these strategies. Let's just go for the Gold Rush, right? And this actually came out during Outlaws of Thunder Junction. This is another card that I recently added. I like these type cards because I wanted to quicken the pace of this cube a little bit. I do like the dynamics and the strategic thing that you talked about with you and Sam, kind of battle shipping, facing off, maneuvering, right?
It was, yeah.
But tell them what Gold Rush does.
So this is 1 and a green for an instant. Create a treasure token. Until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gets +2/+2 for each treasure you control. This is like, reminds me of like Aspect of Hydra.
Yeah.
Cards like that, right? Where you can just spring a huge surprise on your opponent and just, hey, you see I'm attacking with the 3/3 and the 4/4 and, oh no, don't worry about those because you see this little 1/1 guy over here with trample that you don't even need to worry about. Well, suddenly...
You've got your 10 treasures
I've got
9 treasures.
I got a 10/10.
Yeah. And they get Thunderstruck. And that's what, so I like this card. I think it's fine. I think people are going to, I only run one of these. I don't want that to become a theme. This isn't my kill spell type section. So these are the type of cards you're going to want to rush for during the draft.
That does need to be a one-of because I think that can be like sandbag for 2 of those.
Yeah, you just win the game. So I got to be really careful. So I'm doing prize fight where I'm okay with multiple where they take out the creature in response versus that. And then this All That Glitters is another card that the community probably definitely knows about. But this really, I've got this alternate art that is literally like this aristocrat just with piles of money uncounted.
This fits the cube, the vibe of the cube.
It's perfection.
So perfectly. Just piles of gold and the genie lamp and vases and gold swords and the opulent surroundings and all that. Like this is perfect. This is perfect.
All That Glitters is for 1 colorless and 1 planes. You get an enchantment aura, so vulnerability does occur.
That's right.
Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment you control.
And or enchantment.
So treasures plus. It's pretty great.
You can imagine how this can get out of hand very, very, very quickly.
Yeah, so you were actually talking about before, how do you solve these? Because going back to the how do I deal with these different types of things that are killing me, I thought about this too. I didn't want people just to put a treasure on and not be able to deal with it. But learning from Uberbear's Artifact Cube, where I experienced, similar situation, I also didn't want to make it so that you couldn't stick anything either. So there's that weird little balance, that dichotomy that happens as well. But I've got stuff like Crack Open in here, and I've got multiple. This is one where I broke Singleton too.
Yep, there's 2 of these in the cube.
But for 2 colorless and 1 green, you get a sorcery, a little slower. I realize you can't deal with it right away, but destroy target artifact or enchantment, create a treasure token. But there's a lot more in here. I've also got stuff like Broken Bond. Broken Bond's a different card for a different intent. For 1 colorless and 1 green, you get a sorcery, destroy target artifact or enchantment. You may put a land card from your hand on your battlefield. So I'm advancing your board state.
I really like Broken Bond.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very flexible card. I wanted that. But I wanted it so that you could kind of advance your board state without losing. Mm-hmm. And an interesting fact, going off of the enchantment kind of kill stuff about the advancement of the board state, I did do doubles of Explore because it is a Monopoly board. And I figure on that first die roll, you're going around, you're buying properties, because this is all centered around that idea, is you for basically Explore, you get 1 colorless, 1 green. Sorcery, you may play an additional land this turn, draw a card. It's about just advancing your board state and cantripping.
I think, Explore is a kind of a very, very well-known thing at this point. But I think, again, in a cube like this, it's very, very strong. But it's not outrageous because what am I going to use this for? Am I going to use it to accelerate my mana? Sure. But maybe I'm using one of my tap lands because I need the fixing and I do get to draw a card. So again, when am I going to use this? Am I going to use this after I've done something with my lands? And then I'm like, ooh, do I want to crack treasures for something like that, though? Tension.
Yeah, that's what I'm creating. And then actually, let's go off on another little subject since we're having some fun. So we've talked about trains.deck in our previous episode. And we're going to talk about the trains in a minute. But I put a little guy in here. You want to tell them what this card does?
This came up recently on our Discord. You posted a pick one, pack one. And I wasn't the only person to say this, but this was going to be my pick one, pack one out of that. So again, go check out the Discord, go check out the pick one, pack one channel. A lot of fun happening in there. So this is, I love this card. This is King Macar, the Gold Cursed, King Macaroni. 2 colorless and 2 black for a legendary creature, human. 2/3. whenever King Makar, the gold cursed, becomes untapped, you may exile target creature. If you do, put a colorless artifact token named gold onto the battlefield. It has sacrificed this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Now, obviously, I want to cast this and I want to use it because I want to be able to sing Gold by Spandau Ballet, because it was the first concert I ever went to when I was like 7 years of age. But this to me is just a really flexible, high payoff kind of card. The fact that it exiles a creature anytime it becomes untapped, I don't want to say this is watchlist worthy already, but I would almost sort of keep an eye on that, because I think it's a super strong card, but a super fun card.
It's intended for the vehicles. It's intended for that idea. So if we go to our list, the vehicles they're fairly limited, and we kind of talked about this during the previous episode. So I represented some of the game pieces within Monopoly, and I'm going to kind of just read them off real quick, just for people to have name recognition of what I was doing here. But the dog in Monopoly is Spirited Companion. And then recently, I put in Bill the Pony as the horse, because there was another horse and it was terrible. Fleetwood Cruiser is the race car. Yep. That's one of the vehicles you'll put King Makar in. Sky Sovereign Consulship is definitely a good card, and King Makar would also get inside of that and do some real work, but it's the battleship from Monopoly. And then Ethereal Investigator is wearing a top hat, representing the top hat. And then I've got Go to Jail, which I've kind of broken off for a little bit. Go to Jail is a fantastic card. People hate it.
I love the fact that you've got a grey card in here, like an uncard for the flavor.
I did the thing.
So perfect.
I did the thing. And then Mimic is actually the community chest, is what I'm doing here, right? Or the other one. And then Zephyr Boots represents the boots, which is equipped creature has flying. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, then discard a card. So I'm kind of trying to represent the Monopoly pieces. But going back to the King Makar, the vehicles, there's a train.deck that I've put in here as an Easter egg. So I want to represent Pennsylvania, B&O Railroad, Reading Railroad, and Shortline. And I did that by adding, and I'm going to talk about this one card. The other ones are kind of older cards. But Luxurious Locomotive. King Makar would love to get into that. For 5 colorless, you get a 6/5 artifact vehicle. Whenever Luxurious Locomotive attacks, create a treasure token for each creature that crewed it this turn. And then we've got Renegade Freighter, and we actually have Untethered Express, and we have Anodar Express, and then I have a green one too. I technically have a 5th train, but it's green. I wanted 4 colorless, so everybody had access to it, representing the kind of the colorlessness of the 4 railroads in Monopoly.
I built trains.deck.
It's fun.
When you first showed me the list, I said, that's what I want to do. I want to build trains.deck. I did. I did not have King Makar. It wasn't in the version of the cube at that time. I don't know if Aradara Express was in there at that time.
It was.
Or if I had it in my deck.
So was King, by the way. It's always been there.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
But I definitely had Renegade Freighter, and I definitely had Untethered Express in there, and they were game winners. Like, absolutely phenomenal cards. Very, very, very strong. And I love the fact that King Makar is in there. I'm kind of sad that I didn't pick it up at that time, because it would have won me the game so easily. But yeah, trains.deck is a real thing. So
let's kind of change subjects here a little bit. You kind of get that idea of what I've done here for an expansion. One of the major expansions I did, and this is interesting, this is more a useful tool for the listeners. When I started building this cube, we talked about this in a previous episode, I had no intentions of archetypes. I went more on themes, right? So I'm kind of doing like trains, and I'm doing the wealthy and the rich and the poor, etc. I'm doing like an economic system. But what I would encourage listeners to do is to look at your cube for creature types. And why I say that is, after I built this cube with no actual intent of doing this, I realized I had 32 rogues. So I had rogue typal payoffs that I could now add to this cube. It's not something that I thought of from the inception of the cube, nor did I ever intend to do that. And I would say that there's a similar type matter with artificers in Uberbear's artifact cube, or let's just say humans in a horror cube, where you just kind of incidentally get them. Why not add a payoff for 2, right? That makes sense. Like, why not? What's the village, whatever, the gets bigger? I can't think of the name of the card that every time a human enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on it. Doesn't matter.
I don't know.
Doesn't matter.
I know the card, but I don't know the name. I'm not very good with Magic cards.
It's totally slipping my mind right now. But the point is that whenever you look at your cube list, you actually have incidental synergies. You don't have to try too hard. Going back, the reason why I'm mentioning this is a lot of these type of design aspects actually borrowed from my good friend Bill. with his Pockets of Synergy cube, where why do I have to complete a set to make it function, right? So I counted, and I'm like, wow, I have 32 rogues. Maybe I should add 1 or 2 rogue payoffs, incidentally, because rogues are relevant to the economic system for different reasons, right? And the card that actually came upon is Anawan, the Rune Thief. It's a thief. Makes sense in a Monopoly cube, right? And for 2 colorless and Dimir, you get a legendary creature, Vampire Rogue. Other rogues you control get +1/+1. So these other 31 rogues now get a little anthem for no reason whatsoever. And whenever 1 or more rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, that player mills a card for each 1 damage dealt to them. If a player mills at least 1 creature card this way, you draw a card. Anybody that's listened to us before, I'm not in love with mill. I actually have such disdain for the idea of mill. But think about it from this idea, like from an economic standpoint, you're getting grinded down, you're getting milled down, you're having a hard time getting ahead, you're always behind. We all suffer from that, right? Trying to make a living. It kind of made economic sense.
The man is crushing you underneath his foot.
That's what I'm saying, right?
You know?
Yeah, so Anawan is the man.
Yes.
Right? Without even trying too hard, or the person, if we can call him that. But nobody knows who that person is, but something's always holding people back. So I wanted something that represented that idea. And even if you don't mill your opponent out with this, say it dies, the value of taking cards off the top of a library is kind of a detriment to any deck. We'd all agree. 40-card decks,
yes.
Right?
It's amazing how quickly that can be impactful in any kind of environment, especially in a slower cube, right? It's not uncommon to go 10, 12, 13 turns in a game like that, right? So if all of a sudden you've got this way to mill 3, now mill 4, now mill 5 even, especially with that anthem effect, like you mentioned, you don't need those rogues to be particularly large on the card. If they're coming down as 2/2s or 2 power, 3 power, 4 power, whatever, that legitimately could be a win condition.
Right, and it's like a little secret hidden thing there. So what I would encourage the listeners and people attending CubeCon is to look at the creature types. But the only tying bond that I really put in here, there's a few little minor ones, but Anawan, the Rune Thief. I think it's interesting. I actually added Thieves' Fortune as well, too, for 2 colorless and 1 blue. You get a instant, which is...
It's a tribal rogue.
We're going to call it... We're going to call it Kindred Rogue now? Or
sure.
Whatever. Sure.
So it has a prowl cost of just 1 blue. So the prowl cost... So prowl can be paid. It's an alternative casting cost.
If a rogue connected.
If a rogue dealt damage this turn, right? And then the card is look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 1 of those cards into your hand, and the rest of the bottom of your library in any order.
So I want to do the little pockets of synergy going back to Bill. I wanted little minor inclusions here. So I think that was interesting. There's a lot of crossover, a lot of cross-pollination we'll talk about soon when we go kind of in the aristocrats, but it did micro synergies there too. I think it's okay that cube curators don't overly invest in air quotes an archetype, but they have payoffs. Stu and I were kind of pre-gaming and talking about this. Just having Anawan and a couple of rogues is more than enough to do enough damage to set someone back that you can take a game by taking out their critical pieces, right? I think that's fair enough.
Yes.
So you don't have to overthink it sometimes.
No, and I think that's a cool little sub-archetype that you've got in there.
That's a good way of calling it. Another thing, too, that I learned from the 216 version, mobilizing up to the 432s, is I had treasures, and I started asking myself, why am I being so ones and zeros, so binary? I had a few guild cards in there that were kind of making the grade, but everybody's got treasures. So by treasures, you have access to all 5 colors. We kind of talked about this during our Fear 5 episode. While I don't run triomes, I run treasures. So that allows players to expand outside of that. So I said, why did I not just run 3-color good stuff? But New Capenna had access to all these because treasures was a very prevalent theme. So I decided to go ahead and dive into that. And these will be included in the show notes. A lot of these are very lengthy. I'm going to read a couple of these cards off and we'll cherry pick from there. But top level, Endless Detour, Spara's Adjudicators, Tivit, Seller of Secrets. You actually want to pause on that one and tell them this card does?
I love this one. This is, again, Tivit, Seller of Secrets. This is 3 colorless, white, blue, black for a legendary creature, Sphinx Rogue.
Secret Rogue.
It's a 6/6 with flying and ward 3. It has Council's Dilemma. Whenever Tivit enters the battlefield, or deals combat damage to a player. Starting with you, each player votes for evidence or bribery. For each evidence vote, investigate. For each bribery vote, create a treasure token. And while voting, you may vote an additional time. Politics, baby.
Politics, right? So it's a very commander deck, but it still works here. I think it's spice, fits my rogue thing, kind of fits that 99 or that 1% versus the 99%. That's what I'm doing here, right? And then we got stuff like Cormelia the Glamour Thief. We have Rakish Revelers. These will all be in the show notes.
Fabine, Boss's Confidence.
But there's another card that actually Stu was talking about that I would like for him to read, please.
So this is Jan Jansen, Chaos Crafter, red, white, black for a legendary creature, Gnome Artificer. It's a 3/3 with haste. It has tap, sacrifice an artifact creature to create 2 treasure tokens, and it also has tap, sacrifice a non-creature artifact, create 2 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature tokens.
It's spice.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
I love you. Just all right. Sack one of my constructs, create 2 treasures. Tap, sack one of my treasures, create 2 constructs.
It's pretty neat, right? And then we actually have some more cards in here, like Villainous Wealth. We have Hostile Takeover, which is 100% economic. I'll read that one to you. It's 2 colorless, and Grixis, you get a sorcery. Up to 1 target creature has base power and toughness, 1/1, until the end of turn. Up to 1 other target creature has base power and toughness, 4/4, until the end of turn. Then Hostile Takeover deals 3 damage to each creature. It's pretty cool. It's like a neat board wipe. I like it. This next one we were kind of chatting about is spicy. You want to tell them about that one?
Yeah, this is Vazi. I think that's pronounced right. Vazi,
Yep.
Keen Negotiator, 2 colorless, black, red, green, for a legendary creature, Human Advisor, 3/3 with haste. It has tap, target opponent creates X treasure tokens, where X is the number of treasure tokens you created this turn. Whenever an opponent casts a spell or activates an ability, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast it or activate it, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, then draw a card.
So you're punishing your opponent, technically, to crack their treasures.
And let's be
or
clear.
yourself, right?
You are. And let's be clear, first of all, there's no condition on this that the opponent had to cast a spell or activate an ability with a treasure that was created from Vazi's ability, right? So this is any treasure. This is getting the payoff. It's drawing cards. And you've now got that tension piece there, right? I'm going to tap. I'm going to give you a couple of treasures. Go ahead. How brave are you right now? You want to sack those treasures? You want to start giving me cards and putting +1/+1 counters on my creatures? Go ahead.
So these cost 1,000,000 mana, so I had to actually look at the curve a little bit too, but the treasure advancement's pretty important here, and I really wanted cards that really looked at the treasures and asked you to do the thing, so I think this is a fantastic card.
Yeah.
We've got some other ones in here too, like Mass Bandits, etc. So let's go back to the micro pockets of synergy that Bill kind of talked about. In the same fashion that I actually added to do this double down on this cube to make it larger, I added rogues. I thought about like maybe I should have a little bit of an aristocrat synergy, but I wanted that to be a light touch also, and I think that's okay. Like life loss, life gain, but very, very small.
Coincidental.
Yeah, coincident. Like you just kind of get a little bit. So stuff like Syndicate of Tides. But this one card I just added recently that I think's really neat, that I was excited about, that I missed. It came out in the Clue edition. These are so random, right? Like these are cards that are not foiled, which really kind of grinds my gears a little bit because I wanted this cube to be foiled out. Not gonna lie to you. Syndicate Heavy, you get 2 colors. You can either do hybrid plains or swamp. Creature, giant rogue.
So it has extort. Whenever you cast a spell, you may pay 1 white or 1 black. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain that much life. It's a 4/4, and at the beginning of each end step, if you gain 4 or more life this turn, investigate, which is create a clue.
Yeah, I think it's neat. I like these kind of cards just kind of give you little micro payoffs. You don't have to try too hard. That's what I wanted to talk about. Is I run about 5 cards that do this thing, but I didn't want extort. I didn't want this all to be a thing, but I wanted it to be like little microcosms, right? And in a non-archetype driven cube, it's okay that you have not necessarily flushed out synergies, but you have little key pieces. Players might argue that this is like a fake signpost, that I think I could...
I was going to ask that question about the whole fake signpost, because this, to me, if I see this, I look at this in a pick one, pack one, right? I'm going to look at this and say, okay, cool, there's got to be some kind of heavy life gain. So I am going to be expecting a lot of creatures with life gain in the cube, because this is an okay card. It's a 4 mana 4/4, so it's kind of on rate, but it's not a super exciting card if that create a clue token if I gain 4 life each turn is there. So I don't know. You tell me how much life gain exists outside of the extort on these other life gain.
There's a couple of cards, but I didn't want to push it heavy. I want to do like pockets of synergy. I want to do little small microcosms where people.
You don't need a lot, do you? You don't need really 30, 40 cards.
It's value added. I didn't need to connect all the dots. Blood Artist is in here, always been in here because it represents one of the unwealthy individuals, a starving artist, right? From a thematic perspective. And I wanted it kind of happen that I wanted it kind of play out that way in this cube. So here we are, right? So yeah, so as players look at this, don't expect like massive archetypes where you're going to get 10 to 15 cards that fall in those synergies, but rather look for little pieces that kind of just, as we talked about in our pre-gaming, kind of just ping and ding the player just a little bit, just enough to get that annoyance through, and they got to deal with this.
Just a little chicken scratch.
Zulaport Cutthroat's in here. Represents like another one of those kind of systems as we move through that 99%, right?
Yep.
That's what we're doing. Laborers, we're doing unions, we're doing all that stuff. So that's my far-reaching thought in this idea.
All parts of a broken system.
It's all broken.
Thankfully, this cube is not broken.
No, I think this is a really fun cube. So do you have any final thoughts on this cube? Like, any ideas?
Well, first of all, I think I will say I was very skeptical of the whole, oh my gosh, I don't get a land station. I have to draft all the lands. Again, going back to the comment that I made early on, I've never felt that I've had trouble drafting the lands that I need to make a deck work. And I do say that I draft lands fairly highly in every cube. I do prioritize them. I don't necessarily prioritize them any more or less. And this might sound obvious. Maybe it doesn't, considering the comments about the whole Mox thing, but you do generally tend to find, at least the times that I've drafted this, that by the end of each pack, it does seem to be the basic lands that tend to find themselves towards the end of the packs. I don't know if that's just because our group is less experienced with drafting these kind of cubes and we need a little bit more time to understand the power of having the ability to be able to play your spells on curve and quickly. That may very well be a thing, but I've never felt that I've had troubles casting my spells. But it really has turned into one of my favorite cubes to draft. There's the little pockets of synergy, and I love that expression, the pockets of synergy. I love that there's these little diamonds that you can kind of find when you're drafting, right? And it's not just, oh, that's super obvious that there's huge amount of support for this one archetype and here's this payoff and I can just draft the whole deck around that. No, I'm looking at that. And I think that's kind of an attitude that I've had as a drafter over the years, is that I've kind of looked for one or maybe two of these really big reasons to want to draft the cards that I do. But then there's also, oh, look, I've got this other card here that I don't have to go out of my way too much to make it work and to get a lot of value out of it. So those those pockets of synergy really do create a lot of fun in the drafting experience, as well as when I'm playing the deck, and has a huge impact on everything, right? Whether or not I want to, prioritize those cards over, in this case, fixing, or how I would mulligan, or how I would play the game. So I think that cubes like this are, and again, the drafting of lands and not having the basic land station has never felt like a drawback. It really is a unique experience compared to drafting other kinds of cubes. And if you're someone out there that's looking for something a little bit different and already has other cubes, thematic cubes, power cubes, whatever, I really couldn't recommend highly enough this kind of, just a different kind of experience when you're drafting. It's just a whole lot of fun.
And so from the curation standpoint, I'm looking for kind of that overarching dichotomy of economics. I want the buy it now, get what you want now, live in the moment. Versus,
take your loans.
Yeah, versus save for later.
Spend all your cash.
Right.
Buy the big screen TV.
I feel like I've been successful in that idea.
I think so.
But getting 8 people to play this cube will actually prove that. We're working on that as we speak.
I think we're at 3 for tonight.
We're at a solid 3.
It's not looking good.
So, so we're moving over to our socials. I hope you guys get to check out this cube. CubeCon, give it some play testing. Tell me what you think. I want to get your feedback.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you to everyone, to all of our listeners. Want to give a huge shout out to all of our Patreons, and again to our newest Patreon. Thank you very much to Brian. We appreciate your support and hope you enjoy this show as well as all of the others. If you're looking for some help with your cube, or you just want to get in on the conversation, go check out the Facebook drafting page at facebook.com/groups/mtgcube. Our resident host here, Anthony Adams, is an admin, so he can kick out the bots and the spam and the
like
scams.
13 bots this week.
You better get used to that.
That's good stuff.
That's the life of a
Even
Facebook
one of them
admin.
actually had the nerve to have 2 bots of the same picture.
Tragic. As always, if you enjoy the show, please appreciate us by giving a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. It really does go a long way getting the podcast out there to a greater audience. You can also use our altersleeves.com/UberCube affiliate link for 5% off your purchase, as well as our inkedgaming.com/UberCube affiliate link. Go check them out for playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, all kind of custom and large products available. You can reach us at Twitter. We are at UberCubeMTGPod, or via email, ubercubemtgpodcast@gmail.com. Always want to push the Discord. Come check it out. Look at the pick one, pack one. Come check out the deck boast, which again is just going off. So many good decks that we get to see there. And again, if you really want to support the show, help keep the lights on, you can go support us at patreon.com/UberCube. And we appreciate all of you guys.
And other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is Happy Cubing!
Gold!
Treasure!
Always believe in your soul!